gosh, another wonderful turnout. I'm so happy. I think this is going to be a great talk. Dr. Marshall's here. Answer all your questions. Before we get started, though, after the meeting, or after Dr. Marshall's done talking, I have a few announcements, so don't jump up and leave.
That's his name, huh? You introduced him.
Actually, Tad is going to introduce him.
Okay.
So, with that, we're going to get started. Go ahead, Tad.
Okay.
I'm passing around the sign-in sheet while you talk.
Hi everyone. This is my good friend Don Marshall. He was he founded the horticulture program at Lake Washington College.
1979.
1979. And,
40 plus years ago.
He's been the professor of horticulture there, and I had the wonderful opportunity of taking his botany course right before he retired, 4 or 5 years ago now.
Yep.
And so we're honored to just get him out here. He also has co-authored a book that I can't remember the title of.
Home Landscaping, Northwest Region.
Home Landscaping, Northwest Region. And yeah, he's just a wonderful resource. So I think we're going to do a question and answer. And Don already has a list of some questions that he's going to tackle.
Sent.
And then we can just go through and answer more questions.
All right. Welcome. Hi.
Hi.
I'm glad to be here. It's an honor, actually. I spoke to you last fall before last, I guess. We talked about lots of things. I had a rather eventful year last year. In February of 2024, I had a massive stroke and was in the hospital, was paralyzed on the right side. Everything on the right side was gone. And so I've worked really hard, and this is the first public speaking to a garden club that I've done.
You look fabulous.
So, thank you. Thanks. I do notice some of the brain power is a little different than it used to be, and I do struggle with my right side still. I'm in lots of physical therapy, but anyway, it's been quite an eventful year. I went from 60 to 0 like that. Was a big change. So one thing that hasn't left, so much has left, but one thing that hasn't left is just my passion for plants. And I wanted to start this off with talking about hardy cyclamen, because hardy cyclamen, or cyclamen if you're from England, hardy cyclamen is one of my favorites. You know, people say, what's your favorite? And I think it has stuck with me, because what is my favorite plant? It's often the one I'm looking at right now. It's often depending on the season. It's depending on if it's winter or if it's summer. And so it's hard when someone says, what's your favorite plant? It's like, I don't know. But hardy cyclamen has stayed there for so long. And I brought one in. This is a hardy cyclamen, and there's two major species of hardy cyclamen. There's heterofolium and there's coum. And heterofolium, the species for English ivy, the leaves look a lot like English ivy. But it's kind of an interesting plant. And I brought a bunch of different leaves to show you some of the diversity on your treats table when you're over there. The diversity of leaves is incredible because they're sexually propagated through seed. You get a lot of diversity.
Is it evergreen?
And it's not. So let me go through its life cycle. It's really interesting. If we're talking heterofolium, what it does, it's gone in the summertime. I'm sorry? Oh, I thought you said something. If you're talking about what is it looking like, in the summertime, you don't even know it's there. You forgot you planted it and it's disappeared. But then in August, and if we're looking at the heterofolium, oops, that doesn't work. Let's try another one. I couldn't write either. So this is a big step. Heterofolium. If it's a heterofolium, it starts to bloom. It comes up just out of the ground and starts to bloom just like this in August, September, and October. Beautiful, beautiful little flowers. It's very small, no fragrance, rather dainty. And so what it does is it flowers first, and then it foliates all winter long. It gets to be about 6 inches, 8 inches tall, and then it foliates all winter long. And so it's beautiful all winter long. You see it, and then in the spring it starts to die down, and then it disappears in the summer. When it's dying down, the flowers curl into a little curlicue down, and they develop a seed head right here. In August, that seed head cracks open, and all these seeds are there. Well, the seeds are coated with sugar, and so all the ants and other insects take them because they want the sugar. And so the ants will take them, move them to their burrows, scrape off the sugar, and then not want them anymore. And so you start to see periodically, well, I didn't plant this cyclamen here, and then there's a leaf coming up, and then there's a leaf coming up, and even in your lawn there's a leaf coming up. It's because some ant took that seed and then dropped it. And so that's how it spreads. So it spreads over time. Yes?
Are these considered native? I mean,
No.
native?
I wonder where they are. I don't know where they are native to. It's a good. I should have looked that up before I got here.
Because a friend of ours shared some, she called hardy cyclamen, I think.
Yeah, that's what it's called, hardy cyclamen. Yep. So
And I thought they were just native.
so what happened? They appear native because they naturalize very easily.
Okay.
And so this guy then he dies down and he's gone, and that's it. And so it's foliated all winter and all spring, and then about May it starts to kind of fall apart and disappear. That's interesting because it can take sun or shade. Because if you have a hot blazing sun, how hot is our blazing sun in the winter? Not very. The sun's hot in the summer, but it's okay, it's dormant. So it doesn't really matter. So you can put it under trees, you can put it in a woodland garden, you can put it in full sun, you can put it wherever you want to. Then there's another species called coum, C-O-U-M, and coum is great. That's what this one is. Coum is great because starting about December, January, through February through March, it's in full bloom. Same thing though, same foliage, same die down, same sweet seeds, but it's nice because now this guy's blooming all winter long. Whereas the heterofolium are just pretty and foliated, they're not putting any flowers. But if you use both of them, then you have these flowers all throughout the winter. Yes?
Native to the Mediterranean region, specifically woodland, shrubland, and rocky areas from southern France to western Turkey, and naturalized further north in Europe and Pacific Northwest.
Oh, naturalized. So it naturalizes very well for us. Anyway, it's really one of my favorites, and I wanted to start off and kind of give you that because it's just a great plant. Okay, you want me to hit some of these questions that you guys had? All right, last year, this is from Lois. Where's Lois?
Actually, Lois just broke her shoulder yesterday, 2 days ago.
Oh,
So she apologized that she didn't know.
tell her we were going to dress her just for her.
I told her I would take notes.
Okay. You want me to go through? Well, then I'll do the first one.
Okay.
Second one's too specific to her yard, and I need to talk to her. So the first one is, last year on a native red currant, there was no lichen. How could I have prevented it from happening this year, and should I treat it? Lichens and mosses on trees. You see a lot of lichens and mosses on trees. Lichens and mosses are naturally occurring. They are often an indicator of the habitat, meaning if you ever go to the Hoh rainforest or if you ever go to a shady part of your yard, you've got lichens and mosses on your trees, and they're kind of the natural part of the ecosystem. They don't know, they're not a parasite. They don't know really what they are in terms of how beneficial they are, but there's some research that's been said that they actually leach nitrogen into the soil for the plant, and they can actually be beneficial. My observations, and I'm a gardener first. I'm a horticulturist, but I'm really a gardener first, and I'm an observer. When you're a gardener, you become an observer of plants. You become an observer of the weather. You become an observer of conditions, and that's what I am. And so you make hypotheses and you make statements and thinking, I don't know if it's always true or not, but this is what I've noticed. What I have noticed is that lichens and mosses, well, for instance, I have fruit trees and they're in full sun, and they're covered with lichens and mosses. So you can't tell me that's an environmental issue. It's not shade, it's not moisture, it's all that kind of stuff. So the question is, and I've noticed this a lot, and so my hypothesis is that lichens and mosses on trees is an indicator of root stress. Plants are stressed, and I did do some reading that said that the pH of the bark may actually change when a tree is under stress. making it more conducive to the growth of lichens and mosses. Because often a very healthy tree, you don't see lichens and mosses. So I guess the question is, do we want to get rid of them? Not particularly. They might even be beneficial. So I would say, when I look at my trees covered with lichens and mosses, I say, I know I didn't plant you. I bought this house, and I know you must have been stressed. It might have happened 30 years ago because they didn't unwrap the root ball. And now the roots are girdling themselves and causing stress. Could have happened a long time ago. What are you going to do for it? Nothing. You're just going to leave it and realize that's what it was. Someone told me once, I've never tried it, someone said dormant oil can get rid of lichens and mosses if you really detest it. My advice would probably be just to leave it alone and not do anything. Here's one. Well, no, because both of these are pretty specific on her plants. She had a question on a rhododendron which was dropping a lot of leaves. And I didn't know how big that rhododendron was. Rhododendrons can have pretty heavy leaf drops. And they lose their lower leaves. And you notice on rhododendron that their leaves are crowded up near the ends of the stem, especially some of these varieties that get 15 feet, 20 feet. Rhodies can get 30 feet tall if it's the right variety. I've got one like 15 feet, and there is like no foliage except at the very tips, and they drop leaves every year. It blooms in July, white, every year, and it does fine, and it's a monster. I had no idea it was going to be this big. How many of your plants you put in, you said, I had no idea it was going to get this large? And that's really what they do. Okay, so let's see, next question. Shar, Terry. Is she here? Okay, so here, this is for you. I have a Daphne odora which looks very sad. Tell me about, Daphne odoras are tough plants, number one, meaning they can often be tough to grow. So tell us about your Daphne.
Well, I bought him last fall, planted it looked fine, and it just looks like it's getting like, it looks like it's dying. It
Yep.
doesn't have any growth. It looks, that when plants start to die, they look lighter color, they keep getting lighter and lighter.
Yeah, or gray.
That's what it looks like now.
Okay, tell me about the exposure.
Semi-shade.
Semi-shade facing
Facing,
east or west or?
that would be, well, it gets south, in that area, it gets south, east and west.
So a lot of sun.
Well, no, not really, because there's huge trees around.
Okay, so it's semi-shade then, I see, okay.
Right, but gets, gets sun throughout,
Okay, how's your soil there?
probably pretty crappy.
Okay. Does it hold moisture? Is it wet in the winter?
There's no standing water, but it is wet.
Yeah. So Daphnes are funny. Daphnes do well under overhangs because they like to have their roots dry. They do well in eastern exposures. They're so fragrant, as you know, and they're so beautiful. We're talking Daphne odora, but they can be finicky too. If they don't have the right conditions, they die. If we have a hard freeze, I lost my Daphne this year with that January, February, whatever that was, freeze. It just died.
Didn't you cover it up?
I did not cover it up. It's eastern exposure, it's under an overhang, and it's close to the house. It should be fine. It's been fine for years. And all of a sudden, now it just said, no, I'm done. I'm like, what happened to you? So when they're happy, they're really happy. Were you going to add to that?
I was gonna say, I lost mine last year. It started to bud. We had a really hard frost. It never really recovered. I gave it a whole summer, and it had full exposure.
Yep.
Not under an overhang. And this year, it just never, the leaves fell completely off of it. Branches looked like they were dying. After 5, I think I had it in there about 7 years. And I just did the coup de grace last weekend.
Got rid of it. And see, it's one of those that got hit with that. Last year's freeze was even harder. I don't know if it was harder, but it was a hard freeze last year. This year we had that, we were coming out. And you wonder, because both of those freezes were late, I mean, we didn't have much of a December, and really, this year we didn't have much of a January until all of a sudden, bang-o, and then we had lots of rain, but we got to 15, we got really cold. You wonder if they were sort of coming out of dormancy, especially something like a Daphne, which comes out early. They're kind of internally. I mean, you may have not seen bud swelling, but even before you see bud swelling, weeks before buds swell, that plant physiologically is coming out of dormancy and starting to grow, and then bang, we got hit with it hard. I think last year and this year was tough. Tougher than if we had gone through a winter and then in December we had that freeze.
And the wind.
And and then this year the wind also, so it was been a crazy year. So I think I wouldn't give up on Daphne, but I might change the location.
So I can transplant it?
You can. They don't like it much. They've got these fleshy roots and a fleshy stem, and they don't seem to transplant real well. Yes.
I have a question about Daphne Dora, about pruning. I have one in a location it seems to like, and it's going crazy.
Right.
And I need to keep it more compact
Yes.
in that area.
Yep.
It seems like the branches are going every which way.
Oh, every which way,
and
you
so
bet.
How do I
The
prune?
good news is you can prune a Daphne anywhere.
Okay.
You can cut it on wood. You can cut, because those leaves, you think about those leaves are leaf, 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 leaf. You can cut it anywhere, and there's going to be a bud that's going to sprout from there. And it will branch. So Daphnes, you can prune them hard. I mean, I wouldn't go down into the trunk, but you could certainly get rid of a lot of that stuff and contain it. Now, when would you do that? The question is, when would you do that? Is yours blooming right now?
Yes.
Then you wait till right after flowering. Right after flowering, then you prune it, because it's still going to be in that growth surge. People say, well, should I fertilize it? If you fertilize it, I would wait until a little bit later in the spring, and I would fertilize with only an organic fertilizer. And the reason I harp on organic fertilizers is because organic fertilizer, see, this is my speech issue with my brain. An organic fertilizer is tied into the microbial activity in the soil, the moisture level in the soil, which also is tied into actually how a plant is growing. And so when the plant starts to need the nutrients, the microbes are releasing it, the water is allowing it because there's still water in the spring, later spring. So that's why I would go with that rather than a 20-20-20 or a 16-16 or something like that. Okay, yes, question?
So I used to use my favorite organic fertilizer was Smart Start by Whitney Farms, especially if I transplanted anything. I never lost when I used Smart Start.
Right.
They're not making it anymore. So do you have one organic transplant fertilizer and then a general organic fertilizer that you like what you would recommend?
Yeah, Whitney Farms went out of business.
Is that why I can't find it?
Yeah, they're gone.
Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah, they're gone. The name was sold, but the company went belly up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because when I Google it, it takes me down this rabbit hole, so that
Right.
makes sense. So,
Um,
do you recommend an organic transplant fertilizer?
Yeah, I would buy whatever I could find for a good price. There's Dr. Earth. There's so many
Yeah.
that are out there.
Like what you just said, microbial. I mean, it basically was just.
I mean, I was in a nursery yesterday, and I walked by and I said, oh, I didn't need this, but I need it, because they had organic fertilizer 50% off. So suddenly that was the one I bought. I made sure it was an organic fertilizer, and I thought, okay, what's wrong with this picture? And I said, why are these 50% off? She said, we had mice get into our shed and they chewed holes in the bags.
Yeah, they do that.
And I said, oh, this is great. I said, I don't see any hole in these 2 bags. And she said, they didn't get them all. Perfect. So that was the one I bought. So I really don't have does anybody else have a good trade name that they really like?
No.
Kiss
We don't really
Organic?
make fertilizer for this.
Yeah, yeah.
You can get Hendricus, I think, at the local.
Hendricus, you can get at the hardware.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't think of the name of the place that has all the bulk soils.
Walgrath.
Yeah.
Walgrath. Okay. Okay. And
I
then,
didn't hear you. What did you say?
Oh, just another local brand is Hendricus fertilizers. Yeah, but I mean, Dr. Earth, all of those are great.
yeah. Question.
Do you think we're over the frost now?
Do I think? No. Are we over the frost? I don't think we're over the frost. Will it be a deep freeze? No. The kind of frost we're going to get now is the 6 a.m., 5 a.m. frosts, where it's 33, 33, and then by right before the sun comes up, it goes to 31, but then it quickly goes to 33 again. We're over the deep freeze. We're over where we are frozen out for a week. We're over that. But you'd be surprised how plants are, I'm putting things in my garden. I put lettuce in my garden 2 weeks ago, starts from my greenhouse. And they took a little bit in the shorts, meaning they didn't look good for a little while, but now I'm noticing the color is suddenly more vivid because it's been in my greenhouse and the light levels are not like they are outside. And so the colors, and it's really doing great.
How many did you put in?
I put in 6 plants.
Oh, that's good, because do it slowly, because you get.
Yeah,
one
do it
lettuce at
slowly
one
over
time.
time. Right. Cilantro I've got out as well. Peas I have out, Okay, let's go on. What is the best vine to grow in shady areas? So tell me about that. What are you thinking of vine? Who had this one?
That's my question too.
Yeah.
Just any type of trellis, a trellis, a vine to grow in shady areas.
Evergreen or deciduous?
I'm sorry?
Evergreen or deciduous?
I don't think it really matters as long as it grows.
Well, because some people have real specific needs on, they want a vine for screening or,
Well, I would like it for that, but either one would be.
so there's nothing like a good clematis, but we've learned from clematis that they bloom at different times, and the spring bloomers, you have to keep that ratty looking foliage all winter.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to like the ones that bloom in the summer so I can cut it to the ground every year and not have to think about it. Anything that blooms early in the spring sets its flowers the following year, so you can't be cutting on that. Vines are so much, there's other clematis that are, there's so many there that are really pretty. Akebia is a fast-growing vine, but it's really fast-growing and pretty aggressive. And it's semi-evergreen. I don't really think I have a favorite vine. There's a lot of them out
Can
there.
you prune them right down to the ground?
Which
I have
akebia?
them in- No,
Akebia?
yeah,
Can you prune akebia to the ground? Yes, you can.
you can.
Yeah, you can prune akebia to the ground. In the freeze, I have a couple akebia. In the freeze of 2 years ago, mine died back terribly, and I cut it almost to the ground, and it came right back.
Did it? I pruned them all.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't care what name they were, I just chopped them off.
Yeah. Okay.
So messy.
They are messy, that's right, and they
And
grow
then all
fast.
the neighbors,
Shar, you want to talk about your dog or not?
Oh, you're going through my question?
Yeah, I'm going through the list here.
Well, I have about 55-pound poodle / golden doodle / poodle. And so I live in the condos here, and I have a nice fenced-in area. Unfortunately, that's where Zoe is too. So she's really precise on the time and where she does her thing each day. So I just guess I was wondering if there are certain plants that are more, she's a girl, so she doesn't.
More tolerant of it.
Her leg.
Mhm.
So it's like, are there certain plants that tolerate that more
Yeah.
than others?
No. It's a massive dose of urea. It's a big pump of nitrogen, and I'd say the only thing I would, if it's really concerning you, I'd have a little water bucket, and then as soon as she's done, I'd dilute it. That's the best really you can. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
Right. Oh, see, I knew that was going to happen. I don't know. Anyway, just ignore it. All right. Rebecca Vale, where are you? Oh, she's not here. Okay, we won't go there. What are three must-have plants in your garden? Why do you adore them? Boy, I think I did address that. We can go on and on. Cyclamen, of course, is one of my favorites. Sarcococa is one of my favorites. Why? Because it blooms in December. It's semi-shady, it's evergreen. It only gets to be about 3 feet tall if we're talking rustifolia. And it smells like gardenias. you know, Edgeworthia. Sarcococa takes shade, you know, as Edgeworthia take more sun. I think we could go around this room and everyone have their favorite plant. I look for plants that do things at different times of year. You know, in the spring, there's a lot going on. And so I want to do the off seasons. I want to make the garden interesting during the wintertime, particularly that November through February stint, which can be pretty bleak in the garden. And so Mahonias can be nice because they bloom early, depending on which you have. Nandinas, because of their color, can be absolutely spectacular. So I think I have a tendency to look at kind of the off-season things and think about when are the shoulder seasons. Or the other thing I do is I have a tendency to look at my line of sight, meaning if I stand at my kitchen window, and I do that a lot, what am I seeing out there? That's what I want to see. I want to see something, you know, forget the dining room, forget the bedroom, maybe you're not there, you know, looking at the neighbors. You want to, this is where I sit and this is what I look out on. So that's where I'm going to put my focus. And I'm going to make that really interesting because that's what I'm looking at, especially I've done so many dishes in my life. You know, the kitchen's really important to me. I used to drive into a garage and then I would walk to the front door. Well, I did this several times, you know, a day, and that walkway was really important to me because I walked by it, and I would either walk by and go, ugh, I have so much work to do, or I'd walk by and say, look at you blooming already. Wow, and that's when I started getting into hardy cyclamen. And that's when I started getting into sarcococa, when I'd get out of my vehicle and I'd be like, oh, man, that is a nice flower, nice smell. Or walking by something and saying, look at you coming up already, and look at you come. You look so nice. By the time you get to the front door, you're in a better mood. Whereas you were in a bad mood coming home from work, you know. That's what I would do. So that line of sight to me is just as important as what it is. And then, of course, we all walk through nurseries and we get impulsive because things look really great. And so you said, okay, you have to think, all right, where am I putting this? You know, what am I going to do? I have a lot of pride right now because one of my daughters, I have 4, and one of my daughters is taking my old program in horticulture. And she's suddenly, at 35, turned into this massive gardener. I went and saw her yard this year. She's in Woodinville, and I went and looked at her landscape, and I said, wow, you have a lot of plants here. She said, I love them. And I said, in 5 years, have you ever been to the flower show? Her garden looked like those, packed in there, you know. And so she just bought a contorted filbert. And I said, remember, this thing is going to get 10 feet, 6 feet wide she said, oh, I think it'll get that tall? Oh, yeah, it'll get that tall. I said, you got a lot of transplanting to do. She said, oh, I'll do it when it grows. Yep, she can. So anyway, okay. What's your advice on lawns in the Northwest? Oh boy, is anyone else struggling with lawns? Deborah, where's Deborah? Yeah, so lawns are funny, especially lawn moss. Well, they're not funny. Yeah, big joke. Lawns are difficult for us. Lawns serve a function that other plants don't. You can't play ball on cotoneaster. You know, I mean, lawns do provide a foil to set off other things, don't they? I mean, there's nothing like a wonderful mixed shrub border that's set off by the lawn. I mean, they can be really beautiful. So lawns have a function. And then I'll tell you what I'm doing in one of my lawns right now. But lawns are tough. You know, again, lawns are tough because lack of soil prep. And it could have been you, could have been the previous owner, could have been, this is what I got when we bought the house. You don't know how the soil was prepped. And when I tell people, well, the best thing to do is sod cut and till and start over, but they're like, not going to happen. So they say, okay, well, the next option is to decide, do I really want lawn? You know, is it too shady? If it's too shady, then maybe you don't want lawn. Maybe you want to consider other things like a fern garden or some stepping stones or a pathway through this with chips and create some more mixed shrubs so that you're not having to mow moss all the time. Moss is a function of an environmental issue, poor nutrition, low pH. Those kinds of things contribute. Compaction of the soil, those things contribute to make the lawns more difficult. To keep a lawn looking good, if you say, I like a lawn, I don't want to spend a lot of money on it, again, using organic fertilizers because of the microbial activity, which will improve the soil a little bit over a very slow period of time, could be one option. I saw a friend's yard. This is kind of interesting, so I'm going to try it this year. She mowed her lawn, and then there was a section where she mowed a border around the edge, and then she left this section alone. And it looked really good. We all want meadow gardens or natural gardens, and so that's what I'm doing this year. I bought a few grasses, blue oat grass and some other things for color and for texture. I pocketed them in my lawn, and I'm not going to mow that area this whole year. But I'm going to outline it with the mower, because that outline in her yard, it set it off. And it said, this is intentional, as opposed to, when are you going to mow your lawn? By having that edge, it just kind of set it off and made it look intentional. Like, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing. And then nobody asked.
Walk through it.
You can walk through it if you want to. We'll see how long it gets. It's kind of like a meadow. I've got a lot of grandkids, so they can be all over the grass, and that's fine. But so I'm going to try that. That's kind of my option. Lawns are something that can be real chemical hogs, with weed killer and fertilizers and water runoff and those sorts of things. So you really have to think about, okay, what impact, especially when we have so much water around here, what about the runoff and what's going on and where is it going, and everything goes to the sound. So I think you have to really think about what you're doing with that. If you do have a lawn, I often, and you're on the water, I would often say have a buffer between the lawn and the water so that you can have shrubs and things like that, or natives that can help capture anything running off your lawn. Even organic nitrogen. I mean, we talk about synthetic nitrogen or synthetic fertilizers being evil. Organic fertilizers can still move with the groundwater and can still move into the sound, and so it's not like you have carte blanche to be able to do that. That's why I still like a buffer for that. Okay. Let's see. Planning irrigation for your garden is your general advice. I guess that's yours. Okay. So the question is, what kind of garden is it? A vegetable garden? Or shrubs?
Shrubs, mostly shrubs.
Okay.
I let the lawn go. It's just become moss, which is fine with me.
Okay, so the question on irrigation, when you're attempting irrigation or considering irrigation, I think I would first say, what kind of bed is this? Is it a vegetable garden? Then that's going to need a little bit more intensive irrigation. Maybe it's drip irrigation. Is it a mixed shrub border, or I'm just going to put in some shrubs? Then I would hope that you would look at that as a short-term proposition, meaning you want to get them over the hump of establishment. And so that ties into soil prep, where you'd want to prep your soil well before you plant. You'd want to plant and then water to get it through that first summer. And then you won't water because it's wintertime. Second summer, I like to water like for maybe 3 years. 3 years to get them established, because my goal is I'm shutting you off pretty soon. But I want you to get established in there, be looking good, and then maybe if we have a really bad August, or we can get some really dry. Sometimes I break down and I'll water mixed shrub borders, because I can, you can look at things and say they are so dry. So I might water a little bit, but I don't do a lot of irrigating in the summertime on established beds. So if it's a new bed or a new planting, I'm always aware, especially if you have pocket plants where you've put this in and this in, everything else is established, I got to keep on those, especially in the summertime.
What happens if it's the salt water comes down?
It goes into plant selection, doesn't it? Plants that would tolerate that. Because there are plants that would tolerate it, and I would Google that. I would look up plants that tolerate salt spray or salt water, because if you have, if you get that south wind and a high tide can really spray things up, and with king tides, they can be really on there. Yeah, and they're getting harder. I'm noticing I live on the water, and the south wind comes in. We have a king tide, and
Yes, that's what's.
wow,
Yeah.
I'm amazed at what's tolerating it. You know,
Waves are high.
but the waves are higher than they used to be.
So what do you do to, through the summer, because it's washed my lawn practically away?
What would I do with the king?
It's not too big a lawn, but,
It goes right up. I have a little bit of a lawn and a bulkhead area, and it goes right up on it.
yeah, right.
Brings
over
all the
bulkhead,
sticks,
yeah.
brings all kinds of things up there, and I just let it go.
You do?
Yeah, I don't do anything.
Well, yeah, but it looks a bit messy, doesn't it?
Well, I rake up the branches, I rake up the debris that has been brought in, but my grass comes back. Of course, I don't water the grass down there at all, so all summer it looks pretty bad. I mean, it looks pretty gray, but it's great because I don't have to mow.
There you go.
Yeah, but it comes up in clumps, hard little clumps.
What comes
of
up in?
good grass.
Oh, the grass does.
Weeds
Huh.
in the lawn, can you,
Well, in the spring you could overseed.
the weeds?
No, overseed the lawn area.
Oh, yeah, but it's that much salt on top of it.
Oh.
Build up.
I guess I don't know. I'd consult someone who knows. That's not me. My experience on that is limited. Okay, so let's see. Any other? Oh, blueberries. Someone had a blueberry question. They're pruning blueberries.
I think it was Lois again.
I don't know why I printed
I
that.
think I sent it to you, though.
You did.
I didn't print out
Where are my blueberry? Here we go.
blueberries. How to prune them.
How to prune blueberries.
Yeah.
Right. Should I address that? She's not here.
Yeah.
I want to.
I'm recording my blueberries, so please address.
Okay, so let's talk blueberries. Blueberries are really one of my favorites. Blueberry shrubs, this is kind of interesting. Blueberry shrubs don't go out of production with age. There have been blueberries over 100 years old that are still producing. It really has to do with how you prune them and with your pruning. Unlike apple trees, they have a useful life of maybe 30 years, maybe 40 years. Some of the new varieties even less. But blueberries just keep producing and producing because they're rejuvenating new canes. Blueberries produce fruit on spurs, right? They have a bud, and that bud starts to grow, and it will produce 7 to 15 berries on that fruiting spur. Once it spurs, then the spur dies. Once it produces fruit, and you end up with a lot of little twigs on there. Blueberries, your biggest thing when you're thinking blueberries, well, there's several big things. One is, how big is it? Because they can get quite large. And maybe it's getting too big where the berries are getting too high and you can't reach them. In that case, one of your prime objectives is to start lowering it. And when I'm lowering it, we're talking major branches back almost to the ground. Maybe 6 inches, maybe 8 inches. So before I start pruning anything, what do? You get the dead out. Now, on blueberries, not those little spurs. Don't worry about those at this point. So first you get the dead out. And you can see with a blueberry, the wood's very gray if it's dead. And it's green or multicolored if it's not. So you would get the dead out. Then if I had a big old plant, I would take a couple canes down low to the ground, maybe 2 or 3 depending on the size, and I'd pull them out. And literally it's like pulling them out. And then you start to see what you have. And then you start going in with the mantra in your head of light and air, light and air. And so you're getting rid of crossing branches. You're getting rid of, think of light coming in and think of wanting to get as much light to those lower areas as possible. And so you do some thinning back to the point of origin, meaning where the branch comes from the stem. And you're taking those out. While you're doing that, you want to be aware that blueberries have 2 types of buds. They have vegetative buds and they have flower buds. And we'll pass this around. This small branch, you can't see where you are. This small branch has some large plump buds. Those are the flower buds. And we'll pass that around. This branch, if you look at it, it's mostly conical. Small conical buds. And so I could look at this branch and I could see maybe 1 or 2 flower buds, but they're mostly conical. But because this was a young plant and I wanted to go low to the ground and it was really dense up in here, I cut it low and I just pulled the whole thing out. So I'm still aware of those plump buds, and now's the time to do it. You've got to do it soon because they're getting too large and they're going to start to open up. But you want to do it like right now. And you want to remove those those buds.
Old
I
wood
mean,
is-
move that oldest wood, and it will start some new stuff. Because what they're going to do is they're going to shoot up new canes or new stems coming up. Those stems will produce flower buds this summer and then produce fruit next year. So blueberries, the rule of thumb is constantly rejuvenation, making sure you're rejuvenating some wood. So you're taking some wood down low. And remember, they have buds all the way along here, so you can cut pretty far down and it will still sprout from there. Or it may die back and it may get some new growth coming there. If you're going to fertilize them, I would fertilize probably in May, after they've leafed out. Right in May, they're getting fruit, they're starting to produce the fruit. That's when their nutrition needs would be greater. Produce May. I had a blueberry farmer friend, and he would fertilize May 1st and June 1st. Give them a little bit both times. Yes?
So I have a real nice blueberry in a very large pot.
Passes. Yeah.
But I'd like to plant it so it gets some root growth.
Good.
But I just don't really know how. We live right on the Sound, glacial till, so the soil is just rocky and not super great. But
Yep.
What does it like?
So blueberries, where are they native to? They're native to bogs. And the thing about bogs, and I learned this very graphically, the thing about bogs is that they have a lot of air in those bogs. And so although it's organic matter, there's also a lot of air there, even though they're wet. And so I have people that will put blueberries in a wet area, because they say, well, blueberries like wet feet. They tolerate wet feet really well. They like wet feet, but they also like oxygen. And so without air, so if you put it in your heavy, wet clay soil, it's going to die. It doesn't like that. So the first thing I do is spend some time with the soil. And whether I'm adding in wood chips, whether I'm adding in compost, something to loosen up that soil a little bit. Their root systems are shallow. They're not a real deep rooter. They're very fibrous and they go kind of wide. So you're going to want to make sure you prepare the soil width more than the depth. And then you're going to want to keep them watered in the summertime. They're not drought tolerant at all. They like summer moisture, and the summer moisture will keep you bearing fruit, and as much sun as you can give them. The biggest area of growth for blueberries in Washington State is Eastern Washington. And you think, Eastern Washington, it's hot as blazes over there. They irrigate, heavy, a lot of irrigation. They can take full sun, but they need irrigation. And over here we say, well, they take full sun, but then we don't irrigate them. And you see where a lot of blueberry farms in Duval and in Snohomish and other parts around, they're often in lowland areas where they can get some good moisture in there as well. Okay? Yes?
Oh, and currants. How do you prune currants?
Flowering currant, fruiting currant?
Yes, fruiting.
Fruiting currants. I've never grown currants.
grow a lot of them.
Has anybody grown currants?
I have some, and they
Are they doing?
They do really well, but
Are they
they're getting
vigorous?
productive.
Yeah, they're vigorous growers.
Yeah, and I was told, well, you can cut the canes and they will develop roots. So I cut some really beautiful canes that had lots of flowers on them and stuck them in the kitchen, and they're pretty, but I do not see any roots on them at all. So,
Okay, and these are your fruiting berries,
yeah, I have
not
some
ribes
white-
sanguineum.
No, I have white currants and I have pink currants.
Okay, okay.
and
So
red currants.
my understanding of currants is, aren't they axillary fruiters? Meaning that they produce on old wood where a leaf was, and they kind of put out a little flower cluster here and a little flower cluster here, and they produce fruit there. So I think you could prune them pretty hard. I probably, the way I would approach it, if I didn't know, I'd look it up, first of all. But then if I didn't really quite get it, I would probably take some of them really low, some of the big ones really low, and then I'd cut some of them almost in half and see what that does. But I've never grown currants before. So it would take some research. Yes?
I have flowering currant,
Yes?
and I just use the get out of saw method, so teach me, please.
So flowering currants, I have flowering currants also. I love flowering currants because they're a hummingbird attractor, which is so great, and the hummingbirds are all over them. They're early bloomers, they're early in the spring. Then in the summer they get this disgusting disease called rust, and it ruins the foliage. But I just kind of say, it's okay, you had a really good season, and it was really, really nice, and it's worth it, but it's got rust, and give it up. I prune my currants any way I feel like it. They're vigorous growers. You can cut them to the ground and they come back. You can cut them in half. I would prune right after flowering, because right now they're just coming into their glory, and so you don't want to touch them now. And see, what you want to think is, like I said, something that blooms in the spring, early spring, it set flowers in August. And so you don't want to, in August, you don't want to go pruning on them. And so the best thing to do is to prune them in that spring right after flowering, and then a few summer, because what happens with currants is they get in the walkway or they get in your face. So those you can cut back anytime, because you're forfeiting those, but who really cares, because they're such a floriferous bloomer anyway. So I think it'd be all right. Okay. Other questions? Yes?
Could you talk about tilling versus non-tilling and what you do in your
Tilling vegetables.
Yeah, your vegetable garden.
Oh boy, that's a topic. Tilling versus non-tilling of vegetables. So this year, last year, 2024, in October, I went to England and I took a class from Charles Dowding at Homeacres. Charles Dowding, if you look at his website, he is prolific as you know, all these YouTubes and stuff. Yeah. He's the father of no-dig gardening.
Yeah.
So I had left for England, working on my recovery, saying to my wife, I don't think we can do this vegetable garden. It's too much for me. I can't do it. We're going to have to cut way back. So I left saying we're going to have to cut back. But then she had said, hey, we're going to be in England and Charles is running a class. Why don't you go take a class? And I thought, wow, can I do that? So I said, okay. So I signed up for a class. I came home and said, man, we're going to do a vegetable garden this year. She said, wait, I thought we weren't going to do one. I said, we're doing it Charles's way. So I took my vegetable garden and I'm going to try no-dig gardening. He has less weeds. You should see this guy's place. It's like immaculate. So no dig. So what he does was I hope I can get this right. Every fall, which I did this fall, I have beds, many raised, they're not raised, they're just berms, okay, for vegetable beds. Covered them with 3 to 4 inches of compost. I purchased compost, went around a compost yard smelling compost, looking for plastic and going, and I'd walk in and say, could I smell your compost? And like, I did it yesterday and I said, could I smell your compost? And she said, sure. And then I came in and said, it says organic compost. Is that redundant? I mean, why is this organic? She said, well, I don't know. I said, do you know where you get it? She said, no, I don't know where I get it. I said, there's a lot of plastic in that. She said, oh, something must have just blown in there. No, it wasn't just blown in there. There was lots of little plastic pieces in there. So, and it's because homeowners put in plastic bags in their compost bins, you know, in their yard waste bins, and then they just shred it up, and then they try to screen it out. They do the best they can. But anyway, so look for a compost. Sorry, I regressed. So,
What are you smelling for?
a good smell, a good earthy smell, not a sour smell, just a good healthy smell. You're like, oh, this smells good, as opposed to, whoa, this is not done. You know, and there's all this stuff coming off of it. So I put on.
Do you use leaves that you've
Oh, leaves are good. Oh, on your garden? No, compost, finished compost. Yep, we're talking Charles method now. Stick with the rules. So 3 to 4 inches of compost. Let it sit all winter long, on top of everything. I didn't weed anything. I just put it on top of everything. I put it on top of the weeds. Charles doesn't like to weed. So I put it on top of the weeds. Right now, my garden looks beautiful. It's the same way I left it. My wife's
coming up through?
no. Well, any weeds that are coming through, we take them out.
Oh, you do.
There were a few creeping buttercup, of course, that were coming through. Pulled those out. They were pretty tired. They came out pretty easily. They were pretty yellow. So we spent 20 minutes doing the whole garden this week. 20 minutes. That's not bad for a big
Who's we?
space. My wife and I.
Oh, just the two.
Yeah. So we weeded that. I have a greenhouse, a Lord and Burnham glass greenhouse. Anyway, sorry. That was a name drop. So I have a glass greenhouse. Grew in my plug trays. I have peas and onions and all sorts of things. What Charles does, he grows them in plug trays. He pops them out of the plug tray, plants them in his garden at the spacing they're supposed to be at. Isn't that hard? Really? You sow seeds and they're too close and you can't really thin them. I hate thinning. You know, it's like, oh, and then the non-thinnings start to mold or they collect slugs, right? So anyway, I'm going to space them as they're supposed to be spaced, and I'm going to let them grow. Then when I harvest, no, in the beds, and then don't pull anything out as you harvest. You cut it off at ground level. You're not disturbing the microbial activity. Even corn, I asked them the specific question, what about corn? I mean, you know, have you seen a corn root system? Massive root system. What about broccoli? Massive root system. No taking out. You cut at ground level. Okay, so you grow and you grow and you grow all year in there. And then the following fall, you cover it with three more inches, and this cycle just continues. He has no slugs, has very few weeds. The secret to his weeding is that once a week he walks through and just plucks out a little stuff or hula hose, the little bit of weeds.
The roots, do they die?
And the roots just kind of die because they're just seedlings. So we're going to see what happens. Now then I had one area that I had let go fallow. I decided I'm not going to plant it this year, so I let it go fallow. It had buttercup and weeds and cover crop and rye and all kinds of things. So I took a weed eater and I cut it down, and according to Charles, this is what you're supposed to do, so I'm going to do it. I covered it with 6 inches of compost, and then I put a weed barrier on top of it. Okay, a black weed barrier on top of it for the whole winter. Then this spring, I'm going to make a few holes in the weed barrier, and I'm going to put in squashes or pumpkins or vines, cucumbers or whatever. So through the plastic into the soil. And so you're just keeping that plastic on there. Then the following fall, or then this fall, I'm going to roll that plastic up. I'm going to put in 3 inches of compost, and now I'm going to treat it as a regular bed. He takes beds out of the field, meaning out of like a pasture, and that's what he does. He just covers it with 6 inches in that case of compost, and then puts down his weed barrier and then grows right in there. Anyway, he's interesting. You should look on his website, charlesdowding.co.uk.com. Yes.
Dowding?
Yeah, D-O-W-D-I-N-G, Charles Dowding. And his farm is called Homeacres. How many of you have heard of it? You've heard of it?
I have heard of, he has a bunch of books out.
Bunch of books, bunch of calendars on when to sow, when to do this kind of stuff. He's an old English guy. He's like my age, so I'll tell you this funny story. I got to tell you this funny story. So we were late to his class because my wife and I, we went to England. We stayed at a bed and breakfast. Bed and breakfast turned out to be 1.5 miles away, which was okay. I arranged to have a taxi come and pick me up for a 10:30 class to start, to come at 9:45. Okay, it's 1.5 miles away. Surely we can do this. Taxi stood me up. Never showed. Here we've paid this money. I want to go. I'm going to take this class. I'm not walking real fast because of my disability here. And finally at 10, I called this company 3 times, no answer. I said, I have asked you to be, anyway, I was so mad. I said, come on, we're walking. And if you've ever walked in England, there are no sidewalks. The roads are, the hedgerows are right here, and everyone goes really fast, and it's like 2 lanes. And so I'd say, car coming, and we'd hit the edge into the nettles, and then we would keep walking, Anyway, we got there. We were just a few minutes late. Everybody's lined up in a chair outside. It's a nice day in the summer, fall, and all lined up in chairs. So I come, and he says, well, here, have a seat here. So I sat down. He said, well, he's a very underspoken English guy. Well, so why don't we start with introductions, shall we? we'll start with you. So I'm the first one, so of course I stand up, say, my name is Don Marshall, and I'm from the Seattle area, Olympic Peninsula, and he asked what you're here to learn. And so I stood up very clearly, gave him all the instructions, and I sat down. Next, everybody looks at me, and he says, okay, next. She says, I'm Marge from Bath, and I'd like to learn about slugs. Sitting down. Next guy says, I'm John from Wells, and I'd like to learn about peas. And everybody went through their thing, and I felt dumber and dumber as I, boisterous American, standing up. You know, I thought, great. Good way to start. You know, I was kind of embarrassed. And, you know, being in education, I want to say things like, you know, people ask questions, and when they ask questions, they mumble, and I can't hear them, and so I want to say, could you speak up, please? You know, but I thought, okay, I've already made an idiot, so I just spent a lot of time nosing my way up to the front, because he'd have this private conversations with people, and he speaks very softly, and you can hardly hear him even when you're next to him. And I'm like, what? I want to know. I think it's that Americanness, you know, this brashness. The English are we had tea, it was very pleasant, it was really a nice day, but he was, so I'm trying Charles' doubting method. We'll see what happens. If it doesn't work, then I'll go back to being discouraged and say, I guess we can't do this.
So were you tilling your garden prior to
No.
going to your class? What was your standard?
My standard was a lot of weeds. I was not tilling because I've been learning more and more about soil organisms and how tilling constantly is destroying all these soil microorganisms that you're trying to encourage. So I was doing less and less tilling to the point of no tilling. But I was still pulling out corn, you know, and I was still using my hori to get everything out, and I was still disturbing the soil a lot and not having good results. We spent a lot of time weeding, and that's when I thought I just can't do this anymore. So that, you know, and I was putting in, so I was direct sowing into my soil, and I would hate to thin. So I would do some thinning, and I'd do some thinning and feel really good about it. But the slugs would still get in there, and so I'm sluggoing. So they would still be eating everything. And the crops wouldn't develop as nice because they're too crowded, you know. So this is going to be different for me to be spacing them as they should be. I mean, whoever spaces things 6 inches apart, 12 inches apart? It's like, oh, really? And give up all that production? And the other thing that I've been growing in, you know, we all have our growing edges in our garden. And the other thing my growing edge is succession planting. And I've been doing a lot of that because, you know, you can have lettuce 3 times a day for about 2 weeks. And then you're so sick of lettuce that you're giving it away, and then nobody wants to talk to you anymore because lettuce is cheap in the grocery store at that time. You know, so I'm really good at, the last couple of years I've really developed, I plant green beans as late as the end of July. And that gives me a harvest right before frost when they start to deteriorate. So the more you can do to drag out the season, to extend it, which means planting more, like every 3 weeks, more often, but smaller quantities. How many lettuce do you really go through in a week when there's 2 of you? You know, even when you have family coming. Yes.
Are you planting bush beans?
Bush beans. Yeah, bush beans. And Territorial has a variety called Speedy, and it's like really short. And so I've been doing that one a lot because I can plant it and plant it and plant it and plant it. Pole beans, you're right. I only do one sowing of pole beans. Yes, question?
Have you tried using biochar to augment your soil?
So I have not. Kip, you have, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've done biochar. You want to tell us about it?
We've done quite a bit of biochar, and the main thing with biochar is to make sure you charge it before you put it in the soil. At the nursery, we put some biochar in a bed, and then we planted, plants did not grow.
Hmm.
Because the biochar will
What time do I have to go?
take all the, it'll take
I'm done?
all the nutrients to itself. So charge it with fish.
So charging means you take the biochar, you put it in a 5-gallon bucket, for instance, and then you fill it with a fish fertilizer and water, so that those, it's the nitrogen source, so that those sites, it's like a piece of popcorn that has all these electrical charges out there, and what it wants to do is hold on to nutrients. And so you have to supply the nutrients to hold on to that, into that biochar, so that when you put it in the ground, it doesn't just kind of absorb a magnet taking all the nutrients out. Is that correct?
Yes. And
Okay.
It'll stay where the biochar is until biology comes and takes it to the plant.
Okay.
Um,
Have you
South
tried it?
America, they couldn't figure out why on the Amazon people were able to have consecutive crops, and what they found was they had created biochar.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so the nutrients stayed right there until the
Yeah.
plants needed it.
So what has your been?
I know, I was thinking about buying it, and I didn't know exactly how to charge it, the best way.
Yeah, so
It sounded like a.
sounds like fish fertilizer would be, it sounds like fish fertilizer would be a good
And
way.
I was just wondering if you had heard of it and if you had tried it.
Haven't tried it, but I've heard of it, a lot of it.
It's good for the environment.
Right, right.
And that's what I was looking for.
Okay, I think it's worth investigating still. Okay, one last question. I think I've used up a lot of time. Yes?
You said that your goal was to not water after like 3 years on a plant. What about orchards?
Again, I try not to water. If I'm going to water, because I have 48 fruit trees, if I'm going to water, it would be maybe while they're in fruit and we're having a really dry summer, then I would put some water on, some supplemental watering. Also, the key is mulching. I put wood chips down on my fruit trees almost every year because I'm wanting to build a really good, thick mulch layer to hold in that moisture. So the combination of adding a lot of wood chips and watering judiciously, and especially if they're in fruit, because it will impact the fruit size if they're too small. Okay, yes?
Quick question on wood chips. If you're putting them in your garden, just not vegetable, but ornamentals,
Yep.
should you plan, if you're using it for weed suppression, do you keep it, if your shrub is, say, around, do you just go to the green part but not to the roots so that water can get in?
So do you hear that question? Wood chips, if you're using it as weed suppression in a mixed shrub border, should you keep the wood chips away from, just keep it to the drip line, or can you go up to the crown? I would go closer in underneath, as long as I'm not right up to onto the crown. Yeah, where the root system and the shoot system meet, that's where you want to just kind of keep that back, and I'd feather it just lightly back. But I'd still, it's okay to put it on top of it, even under the drip line. Okay. Okay, so I've run out of time. Thank you so much. This was a good experience. Thank you.